Welcome to the third webcast of the PBC Morning Dawn study group at Padma Samye Ling. So today we'll be discussing the third chapter of Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche's book, The Buddhist Path, and the chapter is entitled The Primordial Nature. So we'll begin with opening prayers, and then we'll go into the discussion. Samantavajra, Vajrasattva, Pramadavajra, Sri Singha, Dhammakara, the 25 king and subjects, So, Zor, No, Nyak, the 100 Tirtans and others, the lamas of the Kamma and terminal lineages, to you I pray. The supreme tradition of the glorious Buddha Padma Samye, which is the essential, extraordinary view and doctrine of the early translation school, you keep alive and spread by the light of wisdom. Lord of Dharma, great Khenpo, I pray at your lotus feet. In the palace of the Ogmen Dharmadhatu, the essence of all the Buddhas of the three times, the one who shows clearly the Dharmakaya of my own mind, we pray to the Honorable Root Guru. Glorious Root Teacher, precious one, dwelling on the lotus seat on the crown of my head, hold me with your great kindness, bestow the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So, we divided this chapter, the Primordial Nature, into three sections. And so there's 3 points, 1 point for each section of the chapter. And so we'll hit these points one by one, and so more or less we're dividing the chapter into thirds. So I'll just give a really quick overview of the first section of this chapter, and then we'll go right to the point. So for this first part of the chapter, Rinpoches are distinguished between the way things appear and the way they are. And the way things appear is relative truth, and the way things are is absolute truth. And so when we hold on to our concepts about how things appear, this is not the absolute truth of how things really are. And so on the absolute level of how things are, the nature of everything is the same. And when we hold on to the limitations of our own perceptions, as if they're truly real, meaning they have no limitation, then we're mistaken. By grasping onto our limited perceptions as compared to children believing that their games that they play are real. So when we understand our experience without any limitations or grasping, then that is realizing absolute truth, which is called enlightenment. And then they go on to say that our normal awareness is based on habits, and so grasping onto these habits will not lead to a fuller understanding or enlightenment, but it will only make our habits stronger. And so who is making these habits, these judgments, conceptions, perceptions? We feel that I am making these, and who is this I? And this I is one's own mind. And then they say, then look to one's own mind. When we do this, we can't find a truly existent, solid, real object, which is our mind. And not finding that solidly existing mind is called emptiness. And so then they say this emptiness doesn't mean that it's nothingness or non-existence, because the mind is constantly moving. When awareness, our mind moves based on habits, this is called confused habitual mind. And when our awareness moves without being restricted by any habits, the Rinpoches call this clarity. So these beautiful expressions of our mind, when it's not grasping, include things like love, compassion, and wisdom. And so then this is more or less the first third of this chapter. And so then if someone would read this point, which is related here, then we'll discuss.
If we look carefully at the mind, we begin to understand its nature. When we look for the mind, we discover how difficult it is to find. We cannot put it in our hands. We cannot see it, or its nature. The mind is a vast emptiness, called shunyata, or great emptiness. The emptiness nature does not mean that it is blank or a black hole. The mind has many beautiful qualities, like clarity and wisdom. Yet these qualities are inseparable from emptiness.
Anyone have any opening remarks to this topic?
Particularly later on in that paragraph, when they talk about the emptiness nature, it doesn't mean that it's blank or a black hole. I was wondering if you and Laya and Andrew maybe would speak more to that, because I know many of times when someone's new to talking about particularly emptiness, the word emptiness itself kind of catches them, because it always seems like the first thing is to go to that thought of blank or void. So maybe if people could speak more to that, I think it would be really useful for a lot of people.
Definitely, Rinpoche say, what is it empty of? When we look to see the mind, then we're looking for a mind that's really, truly there, as if there's an object there that we can find. So what is the shape? Is it a thing? Is it how big is it? Where is it? They say if we look for the mind like that, then we don't find it. And so instead, what do we find? This constant changing awareness. This love or compassion, our mind is always there. Concepts are always happening, thoughts are always happening, there's always expression. Even if there's not a solid, fixed anything there that's the source of that expression. So they say it's full of love and compassion, it's infinitely expressive of those goodness qualities. But if you look, where is there that actual fixed source of this me, or this some kind of fixed core of them, then we don't find them. And I think Rinpoche is of that is empty of that the fixedness. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what happens. Release the conditioning of the mind. So the conditioning is something that we grasp for. So to release that kind of brings the emptiness.
So what is the condition, okay, so that's point 2, so we'll hold off on the conditioning part, sorry.
Early thinker.
I think here, like on page 20, they say, emptiness is the source of all mental activity, and all movements of the mind are pervaded by primordial awareness. The primordial nature of the mind is not separate from the relative phenomena we perceive right now. And then later they say, the Buddha and all other great masters taught that there is nothing to acquire externally. It is only a matter of working to reveal what we already have. So I thought it might be worth just like on that same note to say like primordial, the chapter is called Primordial Nature. So what does primordial mean? It means always was, it means never has not been the primordial nature. It always has been. Forever. So everything is the primordial nature, in the sense of even the habit patterns and even everything else is a display, actually, in the Vajrayana view, in the Tibetan Buddhism, of that nature, of that emptiness nature, because it's never separate from that. Like they said, it's not separate from the relative phenomena we perceive right now, and enlightenment is not something we'll get outside of ourselves. So anyway, just a thought as far as what is the nature means, is something that's there all the time. And primordial means always was. And it means like you can't escape the primordial nature. So I just thought it's
So, and I guess also in keeping back with that little question, how do you see that relating to that use of the word empty, particularly, when we're talking about the primordial, Rinpoches and so many great teachers, they all talk about that fullness quality in that emptiness.
Yeah.
So I get,
Well, one thing is like emptiness, in one sense, emptiness is not a thing. That's another way of looking at it.
Right.
Emptiness is not like here in the corner of the room is emptiness. Everywhere else is something solid and substantial that's not empty. It's absolutely real in the sense of it's tangible like this. So from that perspective, it's like emptiness is not something separate from
what appears.
What
It's
appears.
The nature of what appears.
And also because of, like, just touching
Essential
on that
nature.
primordial, there isn't anything that we need to do or can do even to make it that way, make it empty. That is its nature. So, like, you know, it's just an interesting thing to think, you know, we're practicing, we're trying to recognize that through our meditation practice, but it is that way, you know, whether we see it or not, it is that way.
So I guess so for people who are new coming to this, then what's something that would be useful, particularly when they're grappling with just even the word emptiness or the concept emptiness? What's a kind of a gentle way of coming into that understanding, or where?
About the word openness.
Openness.
You say more?
I don't know, the openness that there's just that there's lots of room.
Flexibility, maybe?
But no, I think flexibility, you could, but I think more that quality of openness. Empty, you know, empty, like you're saying, has connotations of, in here, like Rinpoche's mentioned in the paragraph, it's not black hole, but like we were saying earlier, it's empty of substantially existing something.
Okay.
So that in that quality of everything that's arising, the quality of our mind, and then when we investigate appearances carefully using our logic, and then applying that in our meditation, then we can maybe begin to, at least on an intellectual level, see like the openness of the situation on any level we're really looking at it. That it's not fixed as any one particular thing, that it's only that thing. But it's an open, there's that open quality. And then, of course, an inseparable from that open quality are these beautiful qualities of clarity, arising energy of compassion and intelligence and wisdom that are inherent to the mind. And here we're dualistic beings connecting with these two aspects, but they're one thing. But that's further, I think, discussion and study and contemplation and meditation. I'm not sure with our timing. I mean, that's definitely good to talk about.
And I think definitely, I would say that, like, something that I found really helpful is this, what is it empty of? If you look to the mind, what is it empty of? If you look outside of phenomena, what is it empty of? And like, it's in the chapter, what I said, it's empty of a true existence. So then is there, what is true existence? And it's always defined as, if something truly exists, it would be singular, independent, permanent. So if something really truly exists, it should be singular, not have any parts. It should be independent and not depend on anything else for it to be the way it is.
No causing conditions.
Not dependent on causing conditions, and it would be permanent, unchanging, unaffected by anything. So singular, independent, permanent. That would be the definition of true existence. And if we look for the mind, we feel it's really there. This me, this I, is really there. Then to say, look to the mind and find that, or look outside and find something that's singular, independent, permanent. And if we find that, then it'd be truly existent. And so it's saying it's empty of being able to find anything like that when we look. So that's really the test. Can we find something like that? Because we might feel there's something like that. But can we really, if we look, let's look, can we find it?
And then I guess another question then that kind of falls within this paragraph. It seems one of the tendencies when someone who's newer starts looking at emptiness, it almost seems like it's jumping right over a little bit into nihilism, which I think we've addressed a little bit in the fact that we're saying what is it actually empty of. But if someone's trying to think about what makes this not nihilism. What were some points that I think, or what are some points that you all would think that would come in handy, or something for people to contemplate on that would keep them into that balance and not dip over into the nihilistic.
I got a point. It's like the mind.
Should we define nihilism first?
Yeah.
Sure. What is nihilism?
Maybe you say, since you're saying.
Oh,
what
well,
do you mean by
so
nihilism?
when we talk about like the two extremes, you have the eternalism where there is that fixed thing that it is unchanging, which we counteract with the singular, independent, and plural, permanent thing. but then also on the other end of the spectrum is nihilism, which is nothing exists, and therefore there's no karma, there's no causes and conditions, and nothing truly happening, which tends to lead to this idea that whatever I do doesn't matter.
And sometimes they define nihilism too as a belief in not in the continuity of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So when the body dies, mind stops. They say that's nihilism. That basically they equate nihilism a lot of times with material, only believing in those things which you can tangibly see, and not believing in the continuity of
Anything more subtle.
anything more subtle or awareness.
Okay.
So, well, I think, like on that question, in the same as point one, if we think of the emptiness of mind, we can think of like, if you look to the mind like it says here, we can't put our hands on it because it doesn't have a simple location, like this book has a simple location. Or like a point on a map, we kind of can see and locate it in space and time. But awareness itself, you can't really just pinpoint exactly where it is.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we all obviously have awareness. Awareness is present right now, that's why we can have a conversation. And because anything can arise in that awareness, that's why we can have any different thought, memories of the past, think about the future, conceptualize the present. The whole reason why we can do that is emptiness. I mean, because awareness is present, it is empty awareness. It's totally open, anything can happen within that awareness, within the space of mind. But yet, when you try to pinpoint it, you can't find any location at all. You can't put your hands on it. So that counters, well, eternalism and nihilism.
Right.
Because awareness is obviously present, and it's something continuous, because we have that sense. But yet, when we pinpoint it, we can't make it into something solid and substantial.
Yeah, I've always deeply appreciated how when Rinpoche talks about emptiness, many times he'll say emptiness awareness, there's always that qualifier that brings in that quality. Even though we're using the word emptiness, which for so many people is charged, he's always very mindful to bring in what's the quality that arises out of that emptiness. What's the quality that, even though it's not fixed, arises, or as they say here, the mind has many beautiful qualities like clarity and wisdom, yet these qualities are inseparable from that emptiness. That's always been, I deeply appreciate how very, very clearly that gets highlighted.
I think,
Go ahead.
it was similar to what Amanda was saying earlier about how, and also what Andrew, how it's not some far out thing. Of course, the more we look, and depending on our clarity of mind, then we maybe see deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's the whole path to enlightenment. But right now, as things are, if we use like all these beautiful tools Buddha gave us, we can't deny we're having an experience. And yet when we look at the mind, look back at the mind that's seeing, what can we find? When we look out at outer phenomena and examine how it's all working and functions and things, but when we really look at how is that working, we find it really is magical. It's mysterious. It is like, this is vivid, and yet if I look back at the mind that's observing this and try to find that's hard. When we really look at on even just
plain outer physical substance, the more we look. There's nothing substantially existing, looking deep, deep, deep into it. So I think that's another thing. It's not some far out thing, it's actually right here and now what we're experiencing in a way. I mean, maybe that's too vague also, I don't know, but that vividness, like that what the Buddha is talking about is the experience we're having right now. And from this experience right now, whether we look back at the subject, out at the object, we can find that openness and that like insubstantial, like mirage, like amazing illusion, magical display, like it said.
Right.
I mean, and yet it's so vivid. And we have feelings, we have perceptions, we can talk, we can do all kinds of things and perceive things, and things can be out of our control or but
Right.
yet that's not different than anything else. That's all part of the nature too. So I think that's a step too, that what we're talking about, what the Buddha is talking about, it's not separate from the experience we're having right now. I guess that part too, that it's vivid, and yet when we really look, it's open. There's that open
That's what
quality.
I was going to say too, about how, just about like now, like just talking about practicing now, as we meditate, and the point is, initially, particularly, to calm the mind, and then, so, most beginners beginning to practice calming the mind and looking at the mind, often they remark, oh wow, it's just so much more wild, So that's pretty obvious in that moment particularly, it's not a blank emptiness, there's all this activity, all this arising, in our minds, outside that how we're perceiving things. I mean, it's just very clearly
Right.
not a blank,
Yeah.
black hole. It's, and then, just continually along the path, it's, I think maybe that's a mistake, that I definitely made in the beginning as I first started practicing. Thinking it's supposed to be that way, as though it's supposed to be emptiness, this flat, like no thoughts, trying to like dump out, what all these qualities, which is just ridiculous in a way. Pretty quickly you realize that's not going to happen. Like, even if you want it to happen, like they're just naturally, like this paragraph, the mind has many beautiful qualities, and they're naturally arising qualities. And we can try all we want, but it's kind of silly if you think about it, trying to kind of hold in those beautiful qualities. So anyway,
Seeing more and more clearly, more and more directly the nature of those qualities, right? I mean, that seems...
yeah.
I think particularly in talking about I'm sorry. No, that was good. I think of this, it segues nicely into the second paragraph, and the fact that like, okay, so what are we? Not so much the empty qualities, but then what are all these concepts? Like, I think the second paragraph highlights that nicely, so I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. Yep. So then the second section of this chapter, just to quickly go over the bullet points so we all kind of are on the same page with it before we hit this second topic. So Rinpoches are saying that when our mind goes to hold on to these outer objects, there's three states of mind that we have. If we go for a pleasant object, we want to experience happiness. If we go for an unpleasant object to avoid, then we have a feeling of suffering. And a neutral object that we don't really perceive much, then we have a neutral feeling, neutral sensation. And if we repeatedly kind of go for the pleasant things, avoid the unpleasant things, then we're reinforcing our habits, and this is called karma. And so the habit strengthens itself as it's reinforced again and again. It makes it easier to happen in the future, and then it just depends on when the right circumstances are available, if that habit's going to arise or not. So Rinpoches then say that all experiences come from mind, but by resting in mind's natural state of balance, our awareness naturally becomes clearer and less habituated. So meditation stops this wheel of constant habits. And that everything we know and experience is created by mind, and that all conceptual thinking we have is based on our habits. And so the habits in our mind then are reflected outwardly in what we say and what we do with our body. And then they go into differentiate at least 8 different levels of mind. So very quickly, there's 5 types of consciousness, about eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, and body. And these are a direct sense impression of what we experience. And then after that, the sixth consciousness comes in, called dualistic consciousness, which strings these sensory experiences together and then comments on them, makes them into a story, and puts them into a sequence. And then beneath this sense of dualistic consciousness is what's called, they refer to as the alaya. So this is this habitual mind, or the consciousness storehouse. It's where our habits are stored. And so where our habits come from is this alaya. And then where they are stored in, and as we reinforce them, is this alaya. But then they go on to say that when we purify this alaya, or this subtle level of our dualistic mind, we purify it of all habits, then we have what's called non-grasping awareness, or primordial nature. So the mind purified of all the habits is called the primordial nature, or non-grasping awareness. Yeah, and so then the difference between whether we suffer or not is really whether we recognize our mind when it's not grasping onto its own habits. And that's what distinguishes sentient beings from Buddhas. But regardless of whether we recognize this or not, like that is the nature of our mind when it's not holding on to habits. And so it becomes very important for us to see how that our mind is when it's not holding on to habits, and also to see how it is when it does hold on to habits. So then that goes into this second point about this conceptual mind. Want to read?
Sure. Conceptual thinking operates on the basis of habitual patterns. The habits that you repeat circle back on you again and again and again. Whatever habits are learned in this lifetime will be reflected in future lifetimes. They are maintained within the mind. Whatever felt comfortable when you were a child formed into habitual patterns that continue now that you're grown. The habits you establish in your mind are reflected in your behavior. In Buddhism, this is known as the law of karmic cause and effect.
I did have one question here, which was, we talk about how the mind has so many beautiful qualities, and we also talk about how conceptual thinking, are these habits, and so, on the outside, on paper, it's very easy to see how we distinguish them, but then when we sit down, it's all it's all going on. So it's like how do you clarify, what's actually clarity and wisdom? What's our habit? What are the ways that we could start distinguishing these things? Not so that we start grasping on to clarity and wisdom as much as to have that recognition.
So they say when the mind is balanced, it arises in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
So they say the nature of mind is totally balanced. But that balance always moves. It arises in certain ways. So then what are those ways it arises? Because if we can look and see if in our mind is it arising in these ways, are these qualities of love and compassion, this bodhicitta, calmness, attentiveness, appreciation, these qualities we've heard about so many times. If they're actually arising more and more in our experience, then that's one way of seeing that, oh, this is a balanced state of mind.
And just what that's like when we can actually calm our body, speech and mind to a place where we're kind of experiencing that. Where we're experiencing that balance and that kind of what that's like. And then maybe when we begin to then start getting distracted from that place, or like holding on into one thing, or like, then maybe that's where we start to be able to observe our habits. Like when we can, on whatever level of meditation we're doing, if we're just calming the body, speech and mind, holding a focus, I think we can all to some degree have an experience of that like lightness and openness and kind of bright quality, or I mean, there's so many adjectives you could put to it, but you know, it is peaceful. There is a sense of vividness and lightness and kind of that's there when we actually can find that balance and that place. And then I think our habits and our concepts are how we either relate to that or, you know, just start trying to figure it out or make it something, or just completely forget what we're doing. And then we realize, oh wait, I'm thinking about, you know, something else, or honing into one sensory experience. I mean, that's just like really gross level, I think, sense of being with the qualities of mind, as far as that, the vivid brightness, wisdom, you know, I forget the words we're using here.
We're talking clarity.
And then our habitual patterns are that, just whatever we fall to. Which again, aren't necessarily bad, there are positive and negative. But, you know, but
habitual
just
patterns
wherever.
at times will tend to draw us away from being aware. And so instead of being aware of the circumstances around us, we tend to fall into that habitual pattern that drags us away from that, which can lead to bad or good tendencies depending on the habitual pattern. But it definitely is one of those things that takes you away from being aware of your surroundings and being able to be the most effective in compassion or in other actions. Whereas if you kind of draw away from the habitual patterns, it lets you have a more open mind towards anything that comes into your view.
I guess even in a simple way of saying it could be this, whether you're distracted or not distracted.
Right.
You know, just if you're distracted and you're following all your ordinary chains, like you're saying, of just dualistic, grasping onto this, following onto that chain, grasping onto that, following onto that chain of thought, you know, that's distraction. And I think we all can realize that that's what it is, you know, and then, oh, hopefully there's some moment where we realize, oh wow, I was just going along with that for a while there, you know, kind of pull back and kind of reconnect and maintain awareness, or, you know, whatever the practices we're doing, but it's, you know, and that's almost just like a simple way of saying it.
And also that part too of building on, we might become aware of habitual patterns we have that are either just a waste of time or just cause more neurosis and trouble for ourselves and others, directly, indirectly. And then there's this whole part of our practice of accumulating merit, you know, so and actualizing our bodhicitta, which in a way is positive response and positive habitual habits that are building on something that, again, it's there. We have that love, we have joy, we have compassion. It's just making it more and more wide and more practical and more beneficial and more actually being that. So there is that part of the habitual pattern that we're working with too, of not only becoming aware of our negative ones, but also the positive too. Because so
creating
in
more
here,
beneficial.
and again, and they may be conceptual, but still we're on the path. So it seems like that's just a good thing to, as we talk about things that habits are habits, you know, good, but they're not all necessarily bad habits. It's just the clinging, I guess.
And I think, like, on that same note, related with habits, it's like, we all kind of know what a habit is. You know, it's like the highlights of our life. Those things we keep telling ourselves over and over again. Oh, this happened to me. Oh, and then it was so good. And you think that thought thousands of times, or hundreds of times, or whatever, over and over and over and over. That's a habit. You know, it's a deep, strong habit. It's like the highlight reel of your life, what you emphasize. Basically, what you emphasize to yourself and tell yourself, I am this way, I am that way, I did this, I did that. And you think according to those terms. And it's just like reinforcing every time. It's reinforcing that tendency to think about it. You think about it more. You think about it over and over again. And oftentimes, you know, like you were saying, that can be positive or that can be negative. And what Amanda was saying, I think it really, that hits the nail on the head. Grasping. How much are you grasping? if you want to know whether a habit is good or bad, just look at the
Right.
contraction around it. Is it something that makes you tense, more narrow, more targeted, and like does your mind get more closed or get more open? And I think all of us, like, it's not rocket science. It's like, I think we all know when we are experiencing that, we are open and we are relaxed and we are mindful. You know, so that's like, I mean, it's a corny metaphor, but like, say when you see somebody that you haven't seen for a long time that you really love, or that there's a, you know, like, then you have that feeling of just, you have the habit of being open and like, you know, loving towards them and relaxed, and you feel your whole, you could be in the worst mood, but you see that person opens up because you have a certain habit with them. Or you see someone else or something else, which really is like a pet peeve and gets you, you know, you have the habit of closing more targeted, you know, more closing down, so.
I think particularly a lot of what you're saying here with the concept, I think it really brings it in nicely to that last point about how you're kind of contrasting the habits have these concepts, the primordial nature is beyond these concepts. So I don't know if you want to elaborate more on this.
Yeah. I would say one point first, before that third part maybe, is it's just totally kind of reiterating what you're saying, and also what you're saying, what we're all saying.
We're out.
Negative habit, positive habit, and then mind without habits. There's negative grasping, positive grasping, non-grasping. There's negative karma, positive karma, mind beyond karma. But the whole path is, here this is talking more about how our mind is conditioned, is grasping, is holding, and how it is when it's not holding. But the path of realizing our mind when it's not holding is doing this really positive, healthy holding, in a way. This accumulation of merit, doing love and goodness, compassion, these qualities that we're trying to do, we have a sense of self, we try to do them, but it's a positive habit, a positive concept, more accurate, more fully expressive. So in the end, we're not giving up all these things and realizing that I'm no one. Like, all my habits are gone and I'm some bland, blank, no person. It's actually, we're becoming more flexible, more full, more fully expressive of our nature. And that's another way that emptiness, it doesn't mean without qualities. It means infinitely flexible, infinitely full of qualities. So in that sense, that it's good. Emptiness, anyway, more flexible. So then this third and final section of the chapter is specifically related to these concepts. And Rinpoches are saying here in this third section of the chapter that the primordial nature is beyond concepts. It's beyond all duality, all grasping. And that duality mind can be explained with concepts. But non-conceptual, non-dual awareness cannot be explained by concepts. And all we can do is look at our own mind and directly experience its nature. And so then they go on, Rinpoches go on to say two stories about this. The first being about more or less a prince who forgot he was a prince, and as a result suffered all these kind of usual experiences that we go through. And then upon remembering that he was a prince, all of a sudden, instantly, was totally out of the turmoil of usual trying to find food and shelter, and instantly had all the things that come with knowing you're a prince. So he recognized that who he was, and all of a sudden, all these good things were there. And then they go on to say that the only difference between sentient beings and a Buddha is that Buddhas recognize this nature beyond concepts, and sentient beings hold on to their concepts, and so we don't recognize that nature. But the nature itself is the same for Buddhas and non-Buddhas, or sentient beings. And the key way of actually becoming Buddhas ourselves is this great joyful effort to continually try to recognize our nature when it's not grasping. And then when we stop grasping entirely, we become Buddhas. So then that's the third part of the chapter. And then the point here, if someone would read it all together. Someone.
The primordial nature is beyond all concepts. It is the beginning of the mind and the end of the mind. We already have it. We do not need anything further. The Buddha and other great masters taught that there is nothing to acquire externally. It is only a matter of working to reveal what we already have. Describing the true nature in words is like looking through a window and seeing the skies square. The actual nature of the mind cannot be expressed, since it is completely beyond concepts. All we can do is look at your own mind and experience its primordial nature. When you are able to maintain that state, you reach enlightenment.
I have a quick point on this, which really helped me as far as meditation. One time a meditator friend, he said, the most natural thing you can do in the whole world is just sit there and relax. Sit still, recognize that, and just relax. So in other words, like, this is on this point, like, beyond all concepts. So we're not twisting something, not trying to make something anything that it's not trying to make what is something that it's not. Oh, I wish it was this way, or I wish it was that way, or this and that, you know, changing and manipulating things. So it's like, basically, not manipulating, not trying to manipulate the circumstances so that it accords with what way you want it to go, and change it from the way you don't want it to go. So anyway, and Rinpoche say here, there's nothing to do, just to sit and relax. But that was helpful for me because it's like, this is not something strange and unusual, meditating and the Buddhist path, and it's the most natural thing in the whole world, actually, because you're not trying to force things to be some way that they're not. You're just relaxing.
They expect that as soon as you start to do meditation, that instantly you will have some thing that you've seen before or read before. This is what happens when I meditate. It's like, no, you have to release those concepts and completely free the mind of that type of thing before you can really understand what it's about.
I had a brief question. You know, and we've talked about this a little bit. There's that positive grasping where we of course we want to accumulate merit and we want to accumulate wisdom, but at the same time we're recognizing that it's not for those accumulations themselves, you know, as much as recognizing the nature, which has that empty quality, as you just described it, that more neutral quality. And maybe, I guess one of the questions I had, particularly for people who are a little newer to this, how is it that you're able to simultaneously understand how it is to engage in positive grasping while still having that more open, flexible kind of quality understanding in your meditation?
I think in one way it comes to motivation. Why am I sitting and meditating? Why am I trying to develop these good qualities? At one level of the Buddhist teaching it is because we have suffering and we want to be out of that suffering. But a little more open, a little more flexible, a little more kind of breezy approaches, we're doing this for everybody. We all have this trouble, we all have this suffering. It's not just about me and my problem, but all these beings, everyone, and to really kind of engage in a little more open way, like a motivation that's a little bigger than just always looking only at our own situation. Then I think this actually really brings that openness. It can help really bring more of that openness with these good qualities too. Not just my love and my good experiences, but for everybody. And like to genuinely try to more and more genuinely feel that.
And I think it touches on earlier what we're saying, the inseparability of appearances and openness, or the nature. That there's that quality. We're looking at distinctions as part of the process, but the Buddha never said they were separate. And I think that's something to do. We're always trying to mingle our meditation and our practice with our activities. We're not like dropping everything as soon as we stand up. You know, we're touching home with our formal practice and kind of finding home base, like Rinpoche says a lot. And then we're moving from there, remembering our bodhicitta, remembering whatever we find in our meditation. And I thought too, just one point with just that word meditation that I found helpful too is in Tibetan, how meditation, one meaning, it means to become familiar. So like familiarizing ourselves with the primordial nature, with the openness qualities. familiar with how ceaselessly and unimpededly everything's arising and how vivid things are, and as well as just becoming more familiar with like just how precious our situation is, and impermanence and karma, and I mean all those levels of familiarity, of study, contemplation, meditation. I mean, ultimately the Buddhist teachings are all about that, right? Of becoming more and more familiar with the nature as it is, and seeing what kind of occludes that and obscures that, and what reveals that more. And so that part of our practice too, with bodhicitta and actualizing, generating, accumulating our merit, and doing, the paramitas, generosity, morality, patience, all applied with joyful effort, and then those are qualities of we're engendering more, and we're touching home more, and we're focusing more on connecting with these qualities of like that nature that's arising and shining. That those are more natural than unnatural. What's unnatural is the grasping, so to speak, or what just closes. We're getting close to the end of our time.
We are. Maybe we meditate shortly and then dedicate.
We need to sum any of that up.
And we're wrapping up.
I think that wraps it up fairly well.
And I would just add, like what you said, that
Thank you.
like they say in this chapter, the whole shebang of samsara and nirvana comes from one's own nature. So we're like dreamers who are asleep, who have either samsara dream or nirvana dream. So we have the power, because the nature means it is like what is real. The nature is the actual real thing. And like they say so many times in here, I just thought to just highlight temporary obscurations, temporary nightmares, temporary grasping, temporary. That means comes and goes. It's not intrinsic feature. Primordial nature, that's the title of the chapter. Never comes and goes, always was.
Always there.
Always there, always will be there, always was there, is there right now. So anyway, if the whole thing is a dream of samsara and nirvana, and the whole shebang comes from mind itself, then all this accumulating positive and meditation and everything is just to wake up. It's such a good metaphor. Wake up and realize we're dreaming, and like, oh, it is the nature. You can never escape it. Ha ha ha, like, I'm enlightened now. Now let's share it with everybody, because we're asleep, until you wake up. So anyway, that reminded me of that, how the whole thing is in the context of that. The whole Buddhist path, that's why enlightenment is called awake. Waking up from the dream that samsara and nirvana are something real and solid outside of the primordial nature of mind.
Swasti
Vitayantu
Chotsum
Zasum Jiktu Pemajun Inge Sote Tuje Tujinji Kenchin Badin Chera Chubeku Nyojo Dendro Zetan Dajinjo Om Swasti Chuku Nantalum Kuchen Rezi Chuku Bajun Yabyun Tujetu Vela Bazan Jacho Yansi Gai Tendro Bende Dundu Nushajo Gari Rawe Gowe Jingamsu Pendan Dewa Malu Juwene Shinre Siwan Tenzin Jatsori Shabe Gaji Badu Tenjoji Om Swasti Sewa Rizin Beme Jinlaji, Doni Rube La San Norden La, Shedru Kolo Sunji Bajote, Samchin Nakdan Jule Namja Sho. By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. May the sole source of benefit and happiness, the Buddha's teachings, remain for a long time, and may the victory banner of the lives of the noble ones, the holders of the teachings, remain firm. May all sentient beings always be joyful, may all births into the lower realms cease forever, may the wishes of all the bodhisattvas and all the bhumi swiftly reach fruition. At this very moment, for the peoples and nations of the earth, may not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard, but rather may pure conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme good fortune and well-being always arise. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it may it be generated, and those who have it may it never diminish, but always continue increasing. May the great tradition of Khenpo Shamtarakshita, Lopan Padma Samye, and Dharma King Tritsan Detsen increase and spread throughout the three-realm world. May the appearance of the three jewels and the mind streams of beings remain inseparable and bring sublime well-being throughout the three times. Deity, mantra, and dharmakaya are the nature of appearance, sound, and awareness, the pervasive kaya and wisdom display of the Buddhas. May practitioners of the profound and secret great perfection remain inseparable from the innermost one-taste awareness of wisdom mind.